Before we begin, I want to ask you to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like if you're enjoying these stories from law enforcement. It really helps the channel grow and lets me bring you more of these accounts. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I always love hearing from viewers around the world. Now, let's get into tonight's story. My name is Jack Thibodeau, and I've been a Louisiana State Trooper for 10 years. I patrol Troop C, which covers the Atchafalaya Basin, and if you've ever driven Interstate 10 through Louisiana, you've crossed my territory. That stretch of elevated highway that runs for 18.2 miles over nothing but swamp. That's my beat. Most people drive across it once and never think about it again. Just another bridge on their way to Houston or Florida. But if you're from Louisiana, if you grew up here like I did, you know the basin is different. It's not just a swamp, it's the largest river swamp in the United States. Over 1 million acres of cypress trees, Spanish moss, and black water that's been there since before New Orleans was even a thought. The Chitimacha people lived here for thousands of years before the French came. The land remembers. I'm Cajun, born and raised in Breaux Bridge, about 40 miles north of the basin. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the swamp, about things that lived in the deep water, about the way the trees could move when they wanted to. I never believed her. I was a modern kid, wanted to be a cop, wanted to serve and protect. Folklore was just that, folk stories. Nothing more. I was wrong. This all started 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday night in late September. The air was thick with humidity, the way it always is in Louisiana, that heavy wet heat that makes your uniform stick to your skin. I was working the evening shift, patrolling I-10 eastbound, from Lafayette toward Baton Rouge. Around 9 p.m., I got a call from Dispatch, Unit 47. This is Dispatch. We've got a motorist assistance call, mile marker 122, eastbound lane. Caller reports vehicle obstruction on the roadway. Mile marker 122. That put it right in the middle of the Basin Bridge, about 9 miles from either end. The elevated highway out there is just 2 lanes in each direction, with narrow shoulders and concrete barriers on both sides. Beyond those barriers, nothing but 18 feet of empty air and then swamp below. Copy that, Dispatch. Unit 47 responding. I flipped on my lights and headed east. The sun had set about an hour earlier, and the darkness over the basin was absolute. People don't understand that kind of darkness unless they've experienced it. No streetlights, no buildings, no light pollution. Just your headlights and the reflective lane markers. And beyond that, nothing but the black void of the swamp. As I approached mile marker 122, I saw the vehicle, a newer Toyota Camry, dark blue, sitting in the right lane with its hazard lights flashing, no driver visible. I pulled up behind it, hit my spotlight, and called it in. Dispatch, Unit 47 on scene. Vehicle appears to be abandoned, running the plate now. I ran the Louisiana plate through the system. Registered to a Michael Cook, 34, Baton Rouge address. No wants or warrants. I grabbed my flashlight and approached the vehicle cautiously, the way you're trained to do. You never know if someone's hiding inside, if there's been a medical emergency, or if it's something else entirely. The driver's door was unlocked. I opened it and looked inside. Keys still in the ignition, engine off. A cell phone sitting in the cup-holder wallet on the passenger seat with Michael Cook's driver's license visible. A half-empty bottle of water. Everything you'd expect from someone who'd been driving normally, but no Michael Cook. I walked around the vehicle, checking for damage, for any sign of what might have caused him to stop. Nothing. No flat tire, no visible mechanical problems. I looked over the concrete barrier at the swamp below. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the red and blue of my emergency lights. If someone had jumped or fallen, there'd be ripples. There was nothing. Dispatch, Unit 47. Driver is not with the vehicle. Personal effects are inside, including wallet and phone. No signs of distress or foul play. Requesting backup for a search. Copy, Unit 47. Nearest backup is 20 minutes out. Do you want to wait or proceed? I looked at the empty car, then at the darkness surrounding me. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't articulate what. I'll start a preliminary search, have them expedite. I started walking the shoulder, shining my flashlight along the barriers and down at the swamp. The rules were clear on this kind of situation. Check both directions for a quarter mile, look for any signs of where the driver might have gone. But out here, on an elevated highway over water, there weren't many options. He couldn't have walked far without me seeing him. That's when I noticed it. About 50 feet ahead of the abandoned Camry, the tree line looked wrong. I need to explain something about the basin. When you're driving across that bridge during the day, you can see the cypress trees stretching out to the horizon in every direction. They're distinctive, with their wide bases and knee roots sticking up out of the water. Spanish moss hangs from every branch, giving everything a gray-green, almost ghostly appearance. The tree line, the boundary where the swamp starts, is about 30 feet from the edge of the highway on either side. But as I walked forward, shining my flashlight toward the south side of the highway, I saw what looked like a second tree line, like a reflection or a double exposure photograph. There were the normal cypress trees at their normal distance, and then behind them, or maybe overlapping them, was another set of trees. Darker, denser, closer. I blinked hard, thinking it was an optical illusion, maybe fatigue from a long shift. But when I opened my eyes, it was still there. This impossible second forest occupying the same space as the real one, but somehow separate. I reached for my radio. Dispatch, Unit 47. This is going to sound strange, but I'm seeing some kind of visual distortion near the scene. Possible environmental conditions affecting visibility. Copy that, Unit 47. Can you describe the distortion? How do you describe something that shouldn't exist? It's like there are two tree lines, one normal, one that seems to be overlapping it. Could be fog or heat distortion, but I've never seen anything like it before. Weather Service isn't showing any unusual atmospheric conditions for your location. How's visibility otherwise? I looked down the highway. My headlights, my spotlight, the abandoned Camry's hazard lights. Everything else looked normal. It was just the tree line that seemed wrong. Visibility is otherwise clear. I'm going to continue the search. I walked past the Camry, toward the point where the double tree line effect was strongest. As I got closer, I could see more details. The normal cypress trees were there, exactly where they should be. But the second tree line, the impossible one, was different. The trees were taller, thicker, older. The Spanish moss hanging from them moved, even though there was no wind, and they were closer than they should be. The normal tree line was 30 feet from the highway. This second line was maybe 15 feet away, close enough that if you stood at the barrier, you could almost reach out and touch the moss. That's when I heard the voice. It was faint, coming from the direction of the swamp, and it was calling for help. "Help, please, somebody help me." Michael Cook. It had to be. Somehow he'd gotten down into the swamp. I ran back to my cruiser and grabbed my rescue rope and waterproof flashlight. The protocol was clear. Don't go into the water alone, wait for backup. But if someone was in distress, if they were drowning or being attacked by a gator, minutes could mean the difference between life and death. I called it in. Dispatch, Unit 47, I've got a voice calling for help from the swamp below. I'm going to attempt a rescue. Advise backup to bring boat access if possible. Negative, Unit 47. Wait for backup, that's an order. I hesitated. The voice came again, more desperate. Please. The trees. The trees are moving. Trees don't move. But I'd just seen a second tree line that shouldn't exist. And something in that desperate voice made my decision for me. Copy dispatch, standing by. I clicked off my radio and climbed over the concrete barrier. The drop to the water was about 18 feet. I secured my rope to the barrier and rappelled down, my boots splashing into the still black surface. The water was warm, bathwater warm, and it smelled of decay and plant life. I kept my flashlight above water and swept it across the surface. Michael Cook, Louisiana State Police. Call out if you can hear me. The voice came from my left, from the direction of the strange second tree line. Here, I'm over here. Please, hurry. I started wading through the water, pushing through stands of cypress knees and hanging moss. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, and I could see the normal tree line ahead of me, exactly where it should be. But as I got closer, I saw the second line too, and this close I could see it clearly. It wasn't a reflection or a trick of the light, it was real. A second forest, occupying the same space as the first, but darker, older, wrong. The trees in the second line were moving, not swaying like normal trees in wind. Moving. Their trunks bent and straightened, their branches reached out, and the moss hanging from them writhed like living things. Oh my God! Oh my God, please help me! Michael Cook's voice was coming from inside that second tree line. I pushed forward, my rational mind screaming at me to turn back, but my training and my instinct to help someone in distress pushing me on. As I reached the boundary between the normal swamp and the impossible forest, I felt a change in the air. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the water around my legs went from warm to ice cold. I shined my flashlight into the second tree line and finally saw him. Michael Cook was about 20 feet into the impossible forest, up to his waist in water, grabbing onto a cypress tree to keep from being pulled deeper. But it wasn't the water pulling him. It was the trees themselves. Branches had wrapped around his arms and chest, and the Spanish moss was coiling around his neck like a living noose. "Hold on!" I shouted. "I'm coming!" I pushed into the second tree line, and immediately everything changed. The sound, the air, even the quality of light from my flashlight. It was like stepping through a membrane into another world. The trees were massive up close, bigger than any cypress I'd ever seen. Their bark was rough and ancient, covered in moss that pulsed with a faint bioluminescent glow, and they were aware. I could feel it. These trees were watching me, studying me, deciding what to do with this intruder. I waded toward Michael, pulling my knife from my belt. "I'm going to cut you loose. Stay still." But as I reached him and started sawing at the branches holding him, the entire forest reacted. More branches reached down from above, grabbing at me. Moss tendrils wrapped around my arms and my flashlight, trying to pull me deeper into the swamp. I cut frantically, freeing Michael's right arm, then his left. The moss around his neck was tightening, and his face was turning purple. I grabbed it with both hands and pulled, tearing it away. It felt wrong in my hands, not like plant matter, but like something between plant and flesh, warm and pulsing. Michael gasped and coughed, and I grabbed his arm. "Move! We have to move now!" We pushed back toward the boundary between the two forests, fighting against the branches that grabbed at us, the moss that tried to strangle us, the roots that seemed to rise up from the water to trip us. My flashlight had been torn from my hand, but the bioluminescent glow of the moss provided enough light to see by. Just as we reached the edge, I looked back and saw something that would haunt me forever. Deep in the second tree line, between the massive trunks, something was moving. Not a tree, something else. Something enormous, its form suggested by the way the trees bent around it, the way the moss parted. I couldn't see it clearly, couldn't understand its shape, but I knew it was looking at me. And then we crossed the boundary, and we were back in the normal swamp. The temperature rose, the bioluminescent glow vanished, and the trees became just trees again. Dead, ancient, but not moving. Michael and I scrambled back to the highway. My rope was still there, and we hauled ourselves up, collapsing on the shoulder beside my cruiser just as backup arrived 2 other state police units and an ambulance. The paramedics took Michael immediately, treating him for hypothermia and shock. His arms and neck were covered in deep scratches and what looked like rope burns from the moss. The other troopers, Garcia and Williams, came over to me. "Jack, what the hell happened down there?" Garcia asked. I was shaking, still feeling the cold of that second forest, still seeing that vast shape moving between the trees. There was something in the swamp. Something wrong. The trees were moving, grabbing him. I had to cut him loose. Williams looked at Garcia, then back at me. "Trees don't move, Jack." I know what I saw. They helped me to the ambulance and the paramedics checked me over. Minor scratches, mild hypothermia, elevated heart rate from the adrenaline. They wanted to take me to the hospital, but I refused. I needed to file my report while the details were fresh. We towed the Camry and drove Michael to the hospital in Baton Rouge. During the ride, he kept mumbling about the trees, about how he'd stopped because he saw something on the road, something that looked like branches, and when he got out to move them, they grabbed him and pulled him into the swamp, the tree line, he whispered. "It's not where it's supposed to be. It's moving closer." The doctors sedated him before I could ask what he meant. I spent the rest of the night at the station, writing up my report. I tried to be factual, stick to what could be verified. The driver stopped for an unknown reason. Found in a swamp. Rescued successfully. Possible hallucination due to environmental factors. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen the second tree line. The moving branches. That vast presence in the deep forest. I went home as the sun was rising, driving back across the basin bridge in the early morning light. During the day, everything looked normal. The cypress trees stood in their orderly rows. The Spanish moss hung still and gray, and the water reflected the pink and orange of the dawn sky. But as I passed mile marker 122, I slowed down and looked. The tree line was closer. Not by much, maybe a foot or two. But I'd been patrolling this highway for 10 years. I knew every inch of it. And the trees were definitely closer to the road than they had been yesterday. I called Garcia. "You still on duty?" "Yeah, pulling a double Y. Meet me at headquarters. I need to check something in the archives." "Jack, you should be sleeping." "I need to check something first." At State Police Troop C headquarters in Lafayette, I went down to the basement where we kept old records. Incident reports, accident investigations, anything that didn't need to be accessed regularly got boxed up and stored down here. I started pulling boxes from 1995, then 1990, working my way backward. I was looking for any reports of unusual activity near mile marker 122, any mention of the tree line, anything that might help me understand what I'd seen. In a box marked 1985, I found something. It was an incident report filed by Trooper Jean Goudry, dated October 15, 1985. The report detailed a motorist assistance call at mile marker 122. A driver had abandoned his vehicle and was found in the swamp below, suffering from exposure and claiming that the trees had attacked him. The report was marked as a possible psychiatric episode, and the driver was transported for evaluation. But in the margins, in what looked like Trooper Guidry's handwriting, was a note. "Tree line has moved again, 6 feet closer than last survey. Recommend new measurement." I pulled more boxes, going back further, 1975, 1965, 1955. Every 10 years or so, there was a report always at mile marker 122, always involving someone who claimed the trees had attacked them or pulled them into the swamp. And in several reports, there were margin notes about the tree line moving. In a box from 1948, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a survey map of the basin, drawn before I-10 was even built. The map showed the proposed route of the highway, and it included a note in red ink. Chitimacha elders warn against construction at proposed mile marker 122 sacred site. Tree line boundaries must not be disturbed. The highway was built anyway. The first section opened in 1973. And according to the reports, the first incident at mile marker 122 happened in 1975, just 2 years later. I sat there in the basement surrounded by old boxes and ancient papers, and I understood. We'd built a highway through a place we shouldn't have. We'd disturbed something that had been sleeping or contained for who knows how long. And now, slowly, over decades, it was pushing back. The tree line was moving, advancing, getting closer to the highway. And last night, for the first time, I'd seen it for what it really was, not just trees, something that used the trees, something vast and patient and ancient. Garcia found me down there 2 hours later. "Jack, you look like hell. What did you find?" I showed him the reports, the notes about the moving tree line, the survey map with the warning. He read through them, his expression growing more concerned. "This is just coincidence. Old reports, superstition. You're tired, and you had a traumatic experience last night. You need rest. The tree line is closer, Garcia. I saw it this morning. 6 inches, maybe a foot. It's moving. Trees don't move. Then explain the reports. Explain the survey warning. Explain what happened to Michael Cook and what happened to me." Garcia closed the last folder and looked at me seriously. "Even if I believed you, what do you want me to do? File a report saying the swamp is haunted? That's not going to fly with the brass, Jack. You know that." He was right. But I also knew what I'd seen. I need to talk to someone who knows the basin, someone who knows the old stories. Your grandmother. I nodded Mémère. If anyone knows about this, it's her. I drove to Breaux Bridge, to the small house where I'd grown up. My grandmother, Evangeline Thibodeau, was 92 years old and still sharp as a tack. She was on her porch, shelling pecans when I pulled up. "T. Mark," she said, using my childhood nickname, Little Jack. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Cher." I sat down next to her and told her everything. The second tree line, the moving branches, the vast presence in the deep forest. She listened without interrupting, her weathered hands never stopping their work with the pecans. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke in Cajun French, the language of her childhood. "Le déplaceur," the shifter. That's what my grand-mère called it. She told me the story when I was a little girl. What is it? It's old, Cher. Older than Louisiana, older than the Chitimacha, maybe older than people. It lives in the deep swamp, in the oldest part of the basin. The part that's never been cut, never been tamed. It's not a spirit, not a monster. It's more like the swamp itself, given form and will. Why is it moving toward the highway? Because you woke it up when you built that road. The Chitimacha knew. They marked that place as sacred, forbidden. Not because good things happened there, but because bad things were sleeping there. When the highway cut through. When all those cars started driving over every day, all that noise and pollution and disruption, it woke Le Déplaceur. How do we stop it? Mémère looked at me with sad eyes. You don't stop it, T-Mark. You get out of its way. The tree line is moving because it wants the highway gone. It's trying to reclaim the land you took from it. It's 18 miles of highway, thousands of people drive it every day. We can't just abandon it. Then it will keep taking people. One at a time, or maybe more, until you either leave or it decides it's taken enough. I felt cold despite the warm morning. How long until it reaches the highway? The tree line has been moving for 50 years, oui? But it's moving faster now. Maybe it's getting stronger. Maybe it's getting impatient. The way you describe it, the second tree line you saw, that's le déplaceur showing its true boundaries. The real edge of its territory, and that edge is touching the highway now. There has to be a way to stop it. A ceremony, a ritual, something. Mémère shook her head. The Chitimacha might have known, back before the French came, but that knowledge is lost. All I can tell you is what my grand-mère told me. Stay away from mile marker 122, especially at night, especially when the moss is moving. I drove back to Lafayette with my grandmother's words echoing in my head. That night, I was off duty, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the people who drove that highway every day, unaware that something ancient and hostile was pushing toward them. Around midnight, I got a call from dispatch, even though I wasn't on shift. "Jack, I know you're off, but we've got another situation at mile marker 122. 3 vehicles this time, all abandoned, and Trooper Williams says he can see what you were talking about, the second tree line." I was in my truck and on the road in 2 minutes. When I arrived at the scene, it was chaos. 3 cars, a pickup truck, an SUV, and a sedan, all abandoned in the right lane. Emergency lights from 4 state police cruisers lit up the night. Williams was standing at the concrete barrier, staring down at the swamp. "Jack, thank God, I thought I was losing my mind. Do you see it?" I walked up beside him and looked. The second tree line was there, clear and visible, and it was much closer than it had been the night before. The impossible forest was now only about 10 feet from the highway barrier. Close enough that the Spanish moss from the nearest trees was brushing against the concrete. I see it. What the hell is it? Something old, something we woke up. Another trooper, Johnson, came running from the pickup truck. I found a phone. It was recording. You need to see this. We watched the phone's video. It showed a man, presumably the truck's driver, filming himself as he drove across the basin. He was chatting casually, talking about his trip from Houston to Tallahassee. Then his expression changed. He leaned forward, looking at something on the road ahead. "What is that?" he said on the video. "Is that branches?" The video showed him slowing down, then stopping. He got out of the truck, leaving the phone on the dashboard, still recording. The camera captured him walking to the front of the truck, bending down as if to pick something up. Then the Spanish moss from the trees below whipped up over the concrete barrier like a living thing and wrapped around him. He screamed once, briefly, and then he was pulled over the barrier and disappeared from view. The whole thing took less than 5 seconds. The video continued recording for another 3 minutes, showing only the empty highway and the abandoned truck. Then it cut off. We stood in silence, staring at the phone. Johnson's hands were shaking. "That's not possible," he whispered. "We need to close the highway," I said. "Right now, both directions. We need to shut down the entire basin bridge." Williams looked at me like I was crazy. "Jack, this is Interstate 10. We can't just close 18 miles of a major federal highway without authorization from about 6 different agencies. Then get authorization, because if we don't, more people are going to disappear. That thing down there, le déplaceur, it's not stopping. It's taking people now, actively hunting." "Le déplaceur, what the hell is that?" Before I could answer, we heard screaming from the other side of the highway, from the westbound lanes. All 4 of us ran across, and what we saw made my heart stop. A woman was halfway over the barrier. her upper body hanging down toward the swamp. Spanish moss wrapped around her waist and arms, pulling her down. She was screaming and clawing at the concrete, her fingers leaving bloody smears. We grabbed her legs and pulled, fighting against whatever was dragging her down. The moss was incredibly strong, like steel cables. I could feel it pulsing in my hands, warm and alive. We pulled harder, and finally, with a wet tearing sound, the moss released her. We fell backward onto the highway, the woman sobbing in our arms. The moss retreated back over the barrier, but slowly, almost reluctantly, like it was considering whether to try again. I looked down into the swamp and saw it clearly now. The entire second tree line, hundreds of ancient cypress trees, their branches reaching up toward the highway, their Spanish moss writhing like tentacles. And behind them, in the deep darkness of the impossible forest, that vast shape moving. Le déplaceur, showing itself. "Close the highway," I said again, my voice steady despite my terror. "Close it now, or this entire bridge is going to become a grave." Williams pulled out his radio and started making calls. Within 20 minutes, we had authorization to close both directions of I-10 across the Basin Bridge. Traffic control units set up detours at both ends, and we began the long process of clearing the 18-mile stretch. But as we worked, I kept looking at mile marker 122. The second tree line was still visible, still impossibly close to the highway, and I realized that even with the bridge closed, we hadn't solved anything. We'd just bought time, because the tree line was still moving, still advancing, and sooner or later it would reach the highway itself. And then what? The I-10 Basin Bridge stayed closed for 3 days. The official reason given to the public was emergency structural inspection. The real reason was that we had no idea how to deal with what was happening at mile marker 122, and we needed time to figure it out before we let civilians back on that highway. I spent those 3 days barely sleeping, diving deeper into every archive I could access, state police records, Louisiana Department of Transportation files, historical societies, university libraries. If there was any documentation about the basin, about mile marker 122, about the strange incidents over the years, I was going to find it. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. The Atchafalaya Basin has been weird for a long time, long before I-10 was built, long before Louisiana was even Louisiana. I found a journal entry from a French explorer named Jean-Baptiste Lemoine, written in 1699. He'd traveled up the Atchafalaya River and documented a place he called La Forêt qui marche, the forest that walks. He described seeing trees that moved position when he wasn't looking, Spanish moss that reached out to touch his boat, and a presence in the deep swamp that made his native guides refuse to go any further. "They say it is not evil," he wrote in Old French, "but it is not for us. It belongs to an older time, before men. They call it le déplaceur, the shifter, for it moves the very land itself." We turned back. Some territories are not meant for Christian feet. I found similar accounts scattered through the centuries. A Chitimaca oral history recorded in 1850 spoke of a forbidden zone in the deep basin where the trees were alive and the land itself could think. A surveyor's report from 1912 mentioned losing 3 days while mapping a section of the swamp, swearing he'd walked in circles though his compass never deviated. A WPA worker's diary from 1935 described hearing voices in the trees, calling his name, leading him deeper into the swamp until his co-workers found him wandering, unable to remember where he'd been. But the most disturbing documents were the ones I found in the state police archives in Baton Rouge. I had to pull strings and call in favors, but I eventually got access to a restricted file marked Basin Incidents Classified. The file contained incident reports spanning from 1973, when I-10 opened, to 1993. Every single report detailed an event at or near mile marker 122 disappearances. Strange sightings, vehicles found abandoned, people found wandering with no memory of how they'd gotten there. The reports followed a pattern, clusters of incidents every 5 years or so. 1975, 1980, 1985, 1990. Each cluster lasted about 2 to 3 weeks. During that time, anywhere from 5 to 15 people would be affected. Then the incidents would stop, and the highway would return to normal for another 5 years. But the pattern had changed. The last cluster was in 1993, that was 5 years ago, which meant we were due for another one. Except this time, instead of a 2-week cluster, we were 3 weeks in, and the incidents were getting worse, not better. More people affected, the attacks more aggressive, and now the second tree line was visible not just to me, but to other officers. The déplaceur was getting stronger, or bolder, or both. I found a note attached to a report from 1990. It was from the state police commander at the time, a man named Colonel Richard Arsenault. The note was addressed to the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development. I am formally requesting a comprehensive survey of I-10 at mile marker 122. Multiple incidents over the past 15 years suggest a potential structural or environmental hazard at this location. Recommend immediate investigation. Clipped to the note was a response from DOTD, dated 3 months later. Survey completed. No structural anomalies found. No environmental hazards detected. Incidents attributed to driver error and/or psychological factors. No action required. Colonel Arsenault had tried to do something, and he'd been shut down. I wondered if he'd seen what I'd seen. If he'd gone into that swamp and felt the presence of le déplaceur. I tracked down his phone number. He'd retired in 1995 and was living in New Iberia, about 40 minutes from Lafayette. I called him, identified myself, and asked if I could talk to him about the basin incidents. There was a long pause on the line. "You've seen it, haven't you? The second tree line?" "Yes, sir." "Come to my house. I'll tell you what I know." Richard Arsenault was in his 70s now, a lean man with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades working outdoors. His house was a modest ranch style with a porch overlooking a small pond. We sat outside with coffee, and I told him about the recent incidents. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, watching a heron fishing in his pond. "I hoped it was over," he finally said. "The last cluster was in 93, 5 years later. Nothing. I thought maybe it had gone back to sleep, or moved on, or whatever the hell it does, but you're telling me it's worse now. Much worse. The attacks are more aggressive, the tree line is advancing faster, and it's visible to more people, not just isolated sightings. That's what I was afraid of. Every 5 years, it gets a little stronger. The boundaries get a little more blurred. In 1975, it was just 1 or 2 people reporting strange things. By 1990, we had a dozen incidents in 2 weeks. Now you're saying it's been 3 weeks and it's still going. What is it, Colonel? What is le déplaceur really?" He looked at me with tired eyes. "I don't know if I can explain it in a way that makes sense, but I'll try. Back in 1988, during one of the bad clusters, I went down into the swamp myself. I had to see it with my own eyes, had to know what my troopers were dealing with. I took a boat out to the area below mile marker 122, and I saw the second tree line, just like you did." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "I went into it, I know, stupid thing to do, but I was younger and stubborn. And what I found was that the second tree line isn't really a second anything. It's the same forest but from a different time, or a different version of reality. The normal basin, the one we know, was shaped by human activity over the centuries: logging, drainage, hunting, development. But the second tree line, that's what the basin would be if humans had never touched it. Or what it was thousands of years ago, when it was truly wild. So, it's like a time slip, a window into the past. Not exactly. It's more like both versions of the basin exist in the same space, layered on top of each other. Usually, they don't interact, they're separate. But at mile marker 122, the barrier between them is thin. And I think when we built the highway, when we drove thousands of tons of concrete and steel through that spot, and started running thousands of vehicles over it every day, we weakened that barrier even more. We created a wound, and Le Déplaceur is using that wound to push through. Why that specific spot? Why mile marker 122? I asked a Chitimaca elder about that, back in '89. He told me that place has always been sacred, or maybe forbidden is a better word. The Chitimaca called it the heart of the basin. They said that's where the swamp begins, where all the water that flows through the entire basin originates from some deeper source. They have stories about it, going back to before they can remember. Stories about the trees there being the oldest trees in the world, about the water there connecting to underground rivers that flow all the way to the Gulf, about something living in the deep water that's neither plant nor animal nor spirit, but all three at once. Le Déplaceur. That's what the Cajuns call it. The Chitimaca have a different name, but it means roughly the same thing. The thing that shifts. The thing that moves. It's the consciousness of the swamp itself, or maybe it's something older that the swamp grew around, protected. Either way, we pissed it off when we built that highway. How do we stop it? Colonel Arsenault shook his head slowly. I spent 5 years trying to figure that out. I consulted with scientists, engineers, tribal elders, even a couple of priests and a voodoo mambo. Nobody had a good answer. The scientists said it was impossible and I was experiencing mass hysteria. The engineers said the highway was structurally sound, and any environmental issues could be mitigated. The tribal elders said we should never have built there in the first place, and now we had to live with the consequences. And the spiritual folks all said variations of the same thing. You can't kill land, you can't negotiate with nature, and you can't reverse a desecration. So, what did you do? I documented everything. I kept the files you found, and I waited for it to happen again, hoping each time it would be the last. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't stop. Every 5 years, it gets worse. And eventually it's going to get so bad that we can't hide it anymore. We can't explain it away as driver error or environmental conditions. People are going to die, Jack. A lot of people. Unless somebody figures out how to seal that breach. The highway's closed right now. We could keep it closed. For how long? 3 days, a week, maybe a month if you're lucky. But eventually, the pressure to reopen it will be too great. I-10 is a major artery, thousands of trucks a day carrying goods from coast to coast. The economic impact of keeping it closed is massive. Someone in Baton Rouge or D.C. is going to demand it be reopened, and your reports about moving trees aren't going to be enough to stop them. He was right. I'd already been getting pressure from my superiors to justify the continued closure. They wanted concrete evidence of a structural problem, not stories about Spanish moss attacking people. There has to be something we can do, I said. Some way to contain it, at least. Colonel Arsenault stood up and walked to the edge of his porch. There might be, but it would require doing something that goes against everything we're taught as law enforcement officers. What's that? Leaving people behind. I felt cold. What do you mean? The pattern I noticed over the years, the thing that kept me up at night, is that Le Déplaceur seems to have a quota. like it needs to take a certain number of people before it's satisfied and retreats. In 75, it took 6 people. In 80, 9. In 85, 12. In 90, 15. Each cycle, the number goes up. If the pattern holds, this time it wants 18. You're saying we should just let it take 18 people? I'm saying that might be the only way to stop it from taking more. If we try to fight it, if we try to rescue everyone, we might provoke it into taking even more. It's already more aggressive than it's ever been. What happens if we push it further? I can't do that. I can't just stand by and let people die. Then you better figure out another way, son, because the clock is ticking, and Le Déplaceur is getting closer to that highway every day. I left Colonel Arsenault's house with more questions than answers. But I had one lead I hadn't followed up on yet. The Chitimaca elder he'd mentioned, the one who'd explained the sacred nature of mile marker 122. If that person was still alive, maybe they could tell me something useful. I contacted the Chitimaca tribe of Louisiana and explained that I was investigating an incident near their ancestral lands. They put me in touch with a man named Raymond Verrett, a tribal historian and knowledge keeper. We met at the tribe's cultural center in Charenton, about an hour south of Lafayette. Raymond was in his 60s, with long, gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and kind eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Officer Thibodeau," he said, shaking my hand. "Thank you for reaching out respectfully. Too many times, authorities come to us only after it's too late, or not at all. You're asking beforehand. That's good." We sat in his office, surrounded by books, maps, and artifacts. I told him everything, holding nothing back. The incidents, Le Déplaceur, the second tree line, Colonel Arsenault's theories. Raymond listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You've described it accurately. We call it Katifima, which roughly translates to the deep root or the ancient one. It's not a deity, not in the sense of something to be worshipped. It's more like a guardian, or maybe a manifestation of the land's will to preserve itself. Colonel Arsenault said your people marked that area as forbidden. We did. For as long as our oral traditions go back, that place has been understood as the heart of the basin. We have stories about it from before the French came, before the Spanish came, even before the Chitimaca settled in this region. The stories say that when our ancestors first entered the basin, Katifima was already here, already ancient. They made an agreement with it. The people would not disturb the heart of the basin, and Katifima would allow the people to live in the surrounding land. What happens when someone breaks the agreement? Katifima enforces it. Not out of anger, but out of nature. Like a wound closing, or a body rejecting a foreign object. The land protects itself. But your people didn't build I-10, the state did. Why is Katifima punishing random drivers? Raymond smiled sadly. Katifima doesn't distinguish between individuals. To it, you are all the same. You are all humans, and humans broke the agreement. It doesn't understand political boundaries or jurisdictions. It only knows that something foreign is cutting through its heart, and it's trying to push it out. How do we fix it? How do we renew the agreement? You can't. The original agreement was made by our ancestors who understood the land in ways that most people today don't. They spoke to Katifima through ceremony, through sacrifice, through respect built over generations. You can't just show up and negotiate. You don't have the relationship, the history, the language. So, there's nothing we can do? Raymond was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. There might be one thing, but it would require understanding what Katifima wants. It wants the highway gone. Does it? Or does it want acknowledgement, recognition, respect? We assume it wants the highway destroyed, but Maybe it just wants humans to understand that they built in a place they shouldn't have. Maybe it wants the wound to be honored, if not healed. How do you honor a wound? By acknowledging it. By marking the place as sacred again. By stopping the constant flow of traffic that keeps reopening the wound. By giving Kaitifima space to retreat. I thought about this. So, if we closed that section of highway permanently, dedicated it as a sacred site, would Kaitifima stop attacking people? I don't know, but it would be a sign of respect, of understanding. It would show that you recognize the mistake that was made. Whether that would be enough to satisfy Kaitifima, I can't say our people don't speak for it. We never have. We can only interpret its actions through our stories and traditions. Would you be willing to come to the site? To perform a ceremony, or at least to help us understand what we're dealing with? Raymond looked uncomfortable. Going there, to the heart of the basin while Kaitifima is active, would be dangerous, even for me. But he paused, seeming to wrestle with something internal. Yes, I'll come. Not because I can control Kaitifima or speak for it, but because if humans are going to keep dying, maybe there's a way to at least communicate that some humans understand and respect what that place is. We drove to mile marker 122 that evening. The highway was still closed, but I had authorization to access it for investigative purposes. Raymond brought several items with him: tobacco, sage, a small drum, and a bag of cornmeal. When we arrived, the sun was setting, painting the swamp in shades of orange and gold. The second tree line was clearly visible, now about 6 feet from the highway barrier. In the 3 days since I'd last been here, it had advanced another 4 feet. Raymond got out of my truck and stood at the barrier, looking down at the swamp. His expression was one of awe mixed with concern. "It's stronger than I expected," he said quietly. "More active. This is worse than anything in our stories. Is that good or bad?" "Neither, it just is. Kaitifima is responding to a greater threat than it's faced before. 50 years of highway traffic, hundreds of thousands of vehicles, millions of people, all flowing over its heart day after day. From its perspective, this must feel like a constant assault." Raymond opened his bag and began preparing for a ceremony. He spread cornmeal in a circle on the highway, then placed tobacco in 4 directions. He lit sage and let the smoke drift down toward the swamp while he spoke in Chitamacha, words I couldn't understand, but that felt heavy with meaning. As he chanted and drummed, I watched the swamp. The second tree line seemed to pulse with each drumbeat, the Spanish moss swaying in rhythm, though there was no wind. And deep in the impossible forest I saw movement, that vast shape I'd glimpsed before, becoming more visible, more defined. It was massive beyond comprehension, not a creature in any conventional sense, but a network, a system, a presence that extended through the entire second tree line. The trees weren't separate entities. They were extensions of something larger, something that existed as much below the water as above it. The roots went deep, deeper than seemed possible, connecting to underground rivers and ancient stone, forming a web that spanned the entire basin. Kaitifima, the deep root. It was called that because it literally was the root system of the entire swamp, or at least this part of it. The trees, the moss, the water itself, all part of one vast organism that had existed here for thousands of years. Raymond's ceremony lasted about 20 minutes. When he finished, he stood silent for a moment, then collected his items and returned to the truck. "Did it work?" I asked. "I don't know." Kaitifima acknowledged the ceremony. I felt it listening. Whether it will change its behavior, we'll have to wait and see. We drove back to Lafayette in silence. I dropped Raymond at the cultural center, and he gave me his phone number. "Call me if anything changes," he said. And Officer Thibodeau, be careful. Atchafalaya is not evil, but it is not human. It doesn't think like we do, doesn't value what we value. To it, you're just another part of the intrusion. Don't expect mercy or understanding beyond what we tried to communicate tonight. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Raymond had said. Atchafalaya wasn't evil. It was just trying to protect itself, to push out the foreign object that was cutting through its heart. But that foreign object was carrying thousands of people every day, and if we couldn't find a way to coexist, people were going to keep dying. My phone rang at 3 a.m. It was Williams. "Jack, we've got a situation. The highway crew doing the supposed structural inspection at mile marker 122, they're not responding. We sent a supervisor to check on them, and he's not answering his radio either." I was already getting dressed. "I'm on my way." When I arrived at the scene, there were 6 vehicles present. 3 Louisiana Department of Transportation trucks, my supervisor's state police cruiser, and 2 other patrol cars that had been sent to investigate when the supervisor went silent. All 6 vehicles were empty. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing. Just abandoned vehicles with their doors open and their lights on, and the second tree line was now touching the highway barrier. The Spanish moss hung over the concrete, reaching onto the road itself. We were out of time. "We need to evacuate," I told Williams. "Everyone off this bridge now. Jack, there are 9 people missing, and we'll be missing 2 if we don't leave now." We retreated to the Lafayette end of the bridge and established a perimeter. No one was allowed onto the basin section of I-10. The highway remained closed, and now it was looking like it might stay closed for good, but that still left the question, what were we going to do about the 9 people who'd been taken? And more importantly, how many more would Atchafalaya require before it was satisfied? 9 people missing. 9 people taken by Atchafalaya, pulled into the impossible forest, and we had no idea if they were alive or dead. The families were calling, demanding answers, threatening lawsuits, going to the media. The story was starting to leak despite our best efforts to contain it. The headlines started appearing in local papers. "Highway mystery. I-10 closed after workers disappear." By the next day, regional news had picked it up. By the 3rd day, it was national. Conspiracy theories flooded social media. Government cover-up. Alien abduction serial killer. Everything except the truth, which was somehow more unbelievable than any of the theories. On the 4th day of the closure, I got called to a meeting at State Police Headquarters in Baton Rouge. Present were the State Police Superintendent, representatives from DOTD, the Governor's Chief of Staff, and 2 men in suits who identified themselves as being from the Federal Highway Administration. The superintendent, Colonel James Hebert, did not look happy to see me. "Trooper Thibodeau, I need you to explain to these people why one of the most important commercial highways in the country is still closed based on your reports of, what did you call it, a second tree line?" I'd prepared for this. I pulled out my tablet and showed them the video from Michael Cook's phone, the moss reaching up and grabbing him. Then the video from the abandoned pickup truck, the driver being pulled over the barrier, then photos of the victim's injuries, the rope burn-like marks from the Spanish moss, then survey data showing the encroachment of vegetation toward the highway over the past 50 years. "This isn't a supernatural phenomenon," I said, framing it in terms they might accept. "It's an ecological one. The Atchafalaya Basin is the largest wetland restoration project in the country. We've been trying to let the swamp reclaim land that was artificially drained. What if the swamp is reclaiming more than we intended? What if the vegetation growth in the basin is happening faster and more aggressively than the models predicted?" It was a lie, or at least a careful reframing of the truth, but it was one they could work with. Aggressive vegetation growth was explainable. Moving trees controlled by an ancient consciousness was not. The DOTD representative, a woman named Michelle Broussard, studied the data. Even if we accept that vegetation has encroached on the highway, which would be a serious concern, that doesn't explain people disappearing. That suggests human agency, kidnapping, possibly human trafficking. Unless, I said carefully, people are panicking because of the vegetation, jumping or falling into the swamp, and then being unable to get back to the highway. The water below is dark. The cypress knees make it difficult to navigate, and if someone's injured, they'd drown or die from exposure. One of the federal representatives finished, and the bodies would be difficult to recover in that environment. I nodded, hating myself for suggesting that the missing people were dead, but knowing it was the only explanation they'd accept. "What's your recommendation, Trooper?" Colonel Haber asked. "Close this section of I-10 permanently. Reroute traffic to I-12 or US 190. Declare mile marker 122 and the surrounding area an ecological restoration zone, restrict access, and let the basin reclaim it. If we stop the traffic, stop the disturbance, the aggressive vegetation growth should stabilize." The room erupted in objections. The cost of rerouting would be massive. The economic impact on businesses that relied on I-10 would be devastating. The political optics of the state being unable to maintain its own infrastructure would be terrible. "It's an election year," the governor's chief of staff said bluntly. "We can't afford to close a major highway because of overgrown plants. Find another solution." "There isn't another solution," I said. "Not unless you want more people to disappear. Then we need to recover the ones who've already disappeared dead or alive. We need closure for the families. Trooper Thibodeau, you've been on this case from the beginning. I want you to lead a recovery operation. Take whatever resources you need. Go into that swamp and bring our people back." I wanted to argue, to explain that going into the basin, into Katie Fema's territory would be exactly what it wanted. But I also knew that without bodies, without concrete evidence of death, they'd never approve closing the highway. And if they reopened it, hundreds more people would be at risk. "I'll need a specialized team," I said. "Marine Division, search and rescue, medical personnel. And I want complete operational authority. No one tells me when or how to proceed except me." "Done," the superintendent said. "You have 72 hours. After that, we're reopening the highway with or without recovered victims. 3 days. 3 days to go into the heart of Katie Fema's territory, find 9 missing people, and somehow get out alive." It was impossible, but it was also the only chance I had to prevent this from getting worse. I assembled my team carefully. I needed people who wouldn't panic, who could handle weird situations, and who would follow orders even when those orders didn't make sense. I chose 5 people, Williams and Garcia, my fellow state troopers who'd already seen the second tree line. They knew what we were dealing with, at least partially Serena Melanson from Marine Division. She'd grown up in the basin, knew the waterways, and more importantly, knew the old stories. Her grandmother was Cajun like mine, and she'd heard the same warnings about certain places in the swamp. James Dupree, search and rescue. Former Army Ranger had done body recovery in difficult terrain all over the world. If anyone could find people in a hostile environment, it was him and Dr. Rebecca Toussaint, a medical examiner from Lafayette. If we found bodies, I wanted someone who could document everything properly, who could provide the evidence we'd need. I briefed them at Troop C headquarters, showing them everything I'd found. The videos, the historical incidents, Colonel Arsenault's theories, Raymond Verrett's explanation of Katie Fema Twine didn't hide anything. They deserved to know what they were walking into. "This sounds insane," Dupree said when I finished. You're telling me we're going after a sentient swamp? I'm telling you that the terrain we're entering doesn't follow normal rules. Whether you want to call it ecology, spirituality, or quantum physics, something in that area behaves in ways we don't understand. Our job is to locate the missing people and get them out, not to understand or fight whatever's causing this. And if we can't get them out, Dr. Toussaint asked, then we document what we find and we leave. I'm not losing anyone else to this. We launched at dawn the next day, before the morning fog had lifted. Serena had acquired 2 flat-bottom boats with outboard motors, designed for shallow water navigation in the basin. We loaded them with supplies: food, water, first aid, GPS units, satellite phones, flares, and enough rope to pull someone out of just about any situation. The plan was simple. We'd travel by boat to the area directly below mile marker 22, then split into 2 teams. Team 1, me, Williams, and Serena, would search the area near the highway. Team 2, Garcia, Dupree, and Dr. Toussaint, would search deeper into the swamp, following any signs of the missing people. We had 48 hours. If we didn't find anyone by then, we were pulling out and recommending the highway be reopened with increased safety measures. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was the compromise I'd had to make. The boat ride out to mile marker 122 took about 30 minutes. The basin was beautiful in the early morning light. Golden sun filtering through the cypress trees, herons and egrets hunting in the shallow water, the surface reflecting the sky like a mirror. It was easy to see why people fought to preserve this place. It was one of the last true wildernesses in the South. But as we got closer to our target area, the atmosphere changed. The water grew darker, more still. The birdsong faded. The cypress trees were older here, more massive, with trunks as wide as small cars and Spanish moss hanging so thick it created a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. And then we crossed into the second tree line. It wasn't a sharp boundary, more like a gradual transition, like when you're driving and slowly realize the radio has stopped working. The normal swamp faded, and the impossible forest took its place. The trees here were ancient beyond measure. The cypress trunks were covered in thick bark that looked almost like scales, with a faint iridescent sheen that shouldn't exist on plant matter. The Spanish moss moved even though there was no wind, waving gently like it was underwater. And the water itself had a quality to it, a density that was wrong. It was thicker than normal water, more resistant to our boat's movement. "Madre de Dios," Garcia whispered. "Stay focused," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Remember, we're here for the missing people. Nothing else matters." Serena cut the engine, and we drifted in the eerie quiet. In the distance, we could see the elevated highway, I-10, rising above us like a concrete wall. The Spanish moss from the second tree line had reached it, was growing over the barriers, reaching across the asphalt itself. In another day or 2, it would completely cover the road. "There," William said, pointing. "Is that a vehicle?" We moved closer and found one of the DOTD trucks, half submerged in the water. It must have somehow gone over the barrier and fallen from the highway. The doors were open and the interior was filled with moss and muddy water, no bodies visible. "How did it get down here?" Serena asked. "That barrier is 4 feet high. You can't accidentally drive over it." "Maybe it didn't drive," Dupree said from the other boat. "Maybe it was pulled." We continued searching, finding 2 more vehicles in similar conditions. The pickup truck from the video and one of the patrol cars, all half submerged, all empty, all with doors hanging open as if the occupants had simply walked away. "They're deeper in," I said, looking toward the heart of the impossible forest. Katie FEMA pulled them in, and they walked, or were carried. "Then that's where we go," Dupree said. We left one boat tied to a cypress tree as a fallback position, and all 6 of us continued in the second boat, pushing deeper into the territory of the second tree line. The water here was barely a foot deep in most places, forcing us to use push poles rather than the motor. The cypress knees were everywhere, creating a maze we had to navigate carefully. That's when we started seeing the signs. Pieces of clothing hanging from branches, a boot stuck in the mud, a state police uniform hat floating on the water. The missing people had come through here, but whether voluntarily or by force, we couldn't tell. "Jack," Serena said quietly, "look at the trees." The Spanish moss on the nearest cypresses was moving, flowing toward us like a slow-motion waterfall. The bark on the trunks seemed to be shifting, patterns appearing and disappearing. And deep within the forest I could hear it. A sound like breathing, like the entire swamp was one massive lung, inhaling and exhaling. "We're being watched," William said, his hand on his sidearm. "Lower your weapon," I told him. "We're not here to fight, we're here to retrieve our people." "And if it doesn't let us?" I didn't have an answer for that. We found the first body an hour into the search. It was one of the DOTD workers, a man named Thomas Guidry. He was standing in waist-deep water, his back against a cypress tree, his eyes open but unseeing. The Spanish moss had grown over him, through him, integrating with his body. His skin had taken on a bark-like texture, and small cypress roots were growing from his hands and feet. "Mon Dieu," Serena whispered. Dr. Toussaint approached carefully and checked for a pulse. "He's alive. Somehow, he's still alive. But his biology... This shouldn't be possible. Can we move him?" I asked. "I don't know if we should. He's been partially integrated into the ecosystem. Separating him might kill him." "Leaving him here definitely means he's dead," Dupree said. "We have to try." We started carefully cutting away the moss and the roots that had grown into Thomas's body. He didn't react, didn't move, just stared with those blank eyes. As we cut, the entire forest reacted. The breathing sound grew louder. The moss on all the surrounding trees began writhing more violently, and the water started to rise. "We need to hurry," Serena said, panic creeping into her voice. We finally got Thomas free and lifted him into the boat. The moment we did, the forest around us went wild. Branches bent down from above, trying to grab us. Cypress roots broke the surface of the water, reaching like fingers. The moss came alive, whipping through the air like tentacles. "Go! Go!" I shouted, and Serena started the motor. We fled through the swamp, the boat bouncing over submerged roots and barely avoiding low-hanging branches. Behind us, I could see it. The vast presence of Cutifema finally revealing itself fully. It wasn't a creature. It was the forest itself, all of it moving as one organism. The trees bent and swayed in perfect synchronization. The moss formed patterns and shapes, and the water itself seemed to reach up, trying to pull us back. We made it to the boundary between the second tree line and the normal swamp. The moment we crossed, the attack stopped. The trees returned to normal. The water calmed. It was like crossing an invisible barrier. "Everyone okay?" I asked, checking my team. We were bruised and scratched, but alive. Thomas Guidry was unconscious in the bottom of the boat, his body still covered in that bark-like texture, but his breathing was more normal. "We can't go back in there," Garcia said, his voice shaking. "We'll die, all of us." "There are 8 more people still in there," I said. "They're already gone, Jack. You saw what happened to Thomas. He's more plant than human now. The others will be the same or worse. We don't know that." "Yes, we do," Dr. Toussaint said quietly. She was examining Thomas with a portable scanner. His cellular structure is changing. His blood is mixing with, I don't even know what to call it, chlorophyll, some kind of plant-based compound. He's being transformed at a molecular level. If the others have been in there longer, they'll be further along in the transformation. So we're looking for people who might not even be people anymore, Williams said. I looked back toward the second tree line. It was calm now, the trees standing still, the moss hanging limp. But I knew Katie Fima was waiting, watching. It had let us take one person, but it wouldn't let us take more, not without a price. "We're going back," I said. "Jack, we're going back. But this time, we need to do it right. We need to approach this not as a rescue operation, but as a negotiation." "You can't negotiate with a swamp," Garcia said. "Raymond Verrett thinks we can. He said Katie Fima responds to respect, to acknowledgement. It took these people because we violated its territory. Maybe if we ask properly, if we offer something in return, it will give them back." "Offer what?" Serena asked. I looked up at the highway above us, at a 10 cutting through Katie Fima's heart. The one thing it wants, the highway. "You can't promise that," William said. "You don't have that authority." "No, but I can offer a commitment, a pledge that we'll fight to close this section, to give the basin back to itself. Katie Fima isn't operating on human timescales. It's been pushing against this highway for 50 years. It can wait a few more years if it knows we're committed to eventually removing it." "That's insane," Garcia said. "You have a better idea?" He didn't. We loaded Thomas Guidry into the backup boat and had Dupree and Dr. Toussaint take him back to the launch point for medical evacuation. The rest of us, me, Williams, Garcia, and Serena, prepared to go back in. But this time, I called Raymond Verrett first. "Officer Thibodeau," he answered. "I was hoping not to hear from you again. I need your help. We're going back into the heart of the basin to recover the missing people. But I need to know how to approach Katie Fima properly. How to ask permission, or make an offering, or whatever the correct protocol is." Raymond was quiet for a long moment. "You understand that what you're describing isn't like negotiating with a person, or even an animal. Katie Fima doesn't think in terms of deals or trades. It responds to the overall pattern of respect and violation. If you've been violating its territory for 50 years, one respectful gesture isn't going to undo that. But it's a start, right? It shows intent, shows that we understand what we did wrong." "Maybe. What are you offering?" "The highway, not immediately, but a commitment to close it, to let the basin reclaim it." "That's significant, but Katie Fima will need proof of sincerity. Words aren't enough. You'll need to make a sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? I don't know. Something personal. Something that shows you're willing to give up something of value for this. The Chitimaca, when they made their original agreement, offered the best of their harvest every year. Food, tools, sometimes even sending one of their young people to live in the deep basin for a season, to learn from the land. What can you offer that shows equivalent commitment?" I thought about this. What did I have that Katie Fima would want? Not material goods, not money or technology. It wanted respect, recognition, space. And then I understood time, I said. "I'll offer time. I'll commit to being a guardian of this place, to patrolling it, protecting it, keeping people away, for as long as it takes to close the highway properly." That could be years. I know. And you'd be binding yourself to this place, to Katie Fima. There would be a connection, Jack, a responsibility you couldn't walk away from. I understand. Raymond gave me instructions. The words to say, the gestures to make, the way to approach the heart of the forest with respect rather than intrusion. It was part Chitimacha tradition, part improvisation, but it was the best option we had. We returned to the boundary of the second tree line just before noon. The sun was high overhead, but little light penetrated the canopy of the impossible forest. I stood in the bow of the boat and spoke in both English and what little Chitimacha Raymond had taught me. Gatifima, deep root, ancient one. We acknowledge that we have violated this sacred place. We acknowledge that the highway cuts through your heart and causes you pain. We come not to take by force, but to ask for the return of those who were taken in exchange. I, Jack Thibodeau, offer myself as guardian of this place. I will watch over it, protect it, and work to eventually remove the violation. I will be the bridge between the human world and yours. I felt foolish speaking to a swamp, but I pressed on. I offer my time, my service, and my commitment. Please return those who were taken, and I will ensure that your territory is respected. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the water began to ripple. The moss started moving, forming patterns in the air, and deep in the forest a path opened up. The trees shifted, creating a clear passage leading deeper into the second tree line. "It's answering," Serena whispered. We moved forward slowly, following the path. The forest guided us, branches pulling back to let us through, roots flattening to smooth our way. It was eerie, being helped by something that had tried to kill us an hour before. The path led to a clearing, and in that clearing we found them. All 8 remaining missing people, standing in a circle around a massive, ancient cypress tree. They were at various stages of transformation. Some looked almost human still, with only patches of bark-like skin and a few roots growing from their bodies. Others were more plant than person, their features barely recognizable. But they were all alive. Their eyes tracked us as we approached, though they didn't speak. "Can we move them?" I asked Dr. Toussaint over the radio. "Carefully. But Jack, they may not survive the separation from the ecosystem. They've been integrated pretty deeply. We have to try." We approached the first person, one of the DOTD workers. As I reached out to touch him, I felt Katie Fima's presence. It was watching, weighing, deciding. And then I felt something else, a connection, forming between me and the forest. It was like roots growing into my consciousness, creating a pathway. I could feel the entire basin through this connection, the flow of water through underground rivers, the growth of every tree, the life and death cycles of every creature. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying. This was the price of my commitment. I was being bound to this place, made part of it in a way I didn't fully understand. When I left the basin, the connection would remain. I would always know what was happening here, always feel the pain of every violation, always be aware of Katie Fima's presence. I was becoming the bridge I'd offered to be part human, part something else. "Jack?" William's voice seemed distant. "You okay?" "Yeah," I managed. "Start loading them, carefully." We spent the next hour carefully separating the 8 people from the forest, loading them into the boats. Kati Fema allowed it, but I could feel its reluctance, its pain at letting go of what it had claimed. These people had been becoming part of it, had been transforming into extensions of the forest itself. Losing them was like losing limbs, but it honored our agreement. It let us take them because I had offered myself in exchange. As we prepared to leave, I looked back at the heart of the forest, the massive cypress tree that stood at the center of the clearing, and for just a moment, I saw it. Not with my eyes, but with that new connection I'd formed Katie Fima's true form, or as close as a human mind could comprehend it. It was vast, extending throughout the entire basin, connected to every tree, every root, every drop of water. It was ancient, predating humanity, predating civilization. It was the land itself, given consciousness through some process beyond my understanding. And it was lonely, I realized. Cut off from the parts of itself that had been destroyed by development, wounded by the highway, isolated in this last remaining wilderness. It didn't want to hurt people. It just wanted to be left alone, to exist as it had for millennia before humans arrived. "I'll keep my promise," I said quietly. "I'll protect this place. And I'll get that highway closed." I felt something like acknowledgement through the connection. Not words, but understanding Katie FEMA had accepted my offer. I was now its guardian, its voice in the human world, its defender against future violations. We left the second tree line and returned to the normal swamp. Behind us, the path closed, the trees returning to their natural positions. By the time we reached the launch point, it was as if the path had never existed. All 8 people survived the journey out, though they remained in a state between human and plant. The medical teams were baffled, unable to explain or treat their condition. They were eventually transferred to a specialized research facility where they remain to this day, slowly reverting to normal human biology, though they'll never be fully human again. Thomas Guidry woke up a week later. His first words were, "I saw everything, the whole forest. It's alive and it's beautiful, and we hurt it so badly." The incident made national news. "Mystery illness affects highway workers," was the official story. Exposure to an unknown biological agent in the swamp, possibly fungal or bacterial. The highway remained closed while environmental remediation was conducted. But I knew the truth, and now, with this new connection to Katie FEMA, I had a responsibility to ensure that truth was respected, even if it could never be publicly acknowledged. The question was, could I convince the state to actually close the highway permanently? Or would I spend the rest of my life as a guardian of a place that was constantly under threat? I was about to find out. 3 months after the rescue operation, I was still a Louisiana State Trooper. But I wasn't the same person who'd started this investigation. The connection to Katie FEMA hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. I could feel the basin at all times. Even when I was miles away, I knew when someone entered the heart of the forest. I knew when the tree line advanced another inch. I knew when the Spanish moss reached toward the highway, trying to reclaim what had been taken. And I knew that Katie FEMA was getting impatient. The highway had remained closed during the 3 months following the incident. The official reason was environmental remediation and structural assessment, but the real reason was that no one in the state government could agree on what to do. I'd been called to more meetings than I could count. I'd presented my findings to engineers, scientists, environmentalists, politicians. I'd shown them the evidence, the videos, the medical reports of the transformed victims I'd brought in Raymond Verret to explain the cultural and historical significance of the area. I'd even convinced Colonel Arsenault to testify about the pattern of incidents over the past 50 years. Some believed us. Some thought we were covering up a more mundane explanation. But none of them wanted to be the person who made the decision to permanently close a section of Interstate 10. The economic arguments against closure were substantial. I-10 carried over 40,000 vehicles per day through Louisiana. Rerouting all that traffic would cost billions in lost commerce and productivity. The town of Breaux Bridge, which relied heavily on traffic from I-10, would suffer economically. Gas stations, restaurants, hotels, all the businesses that existed to serve travelers, they'd be devastated. But the cost of keeping it open was measured in human lives and in the slow death of one of the last true wildernesses in America. I sat in my patrol car at the entrance to the closed section of highway, watching the sunset over the basin. This had become my routine. Every evening, I came here, parked at the barrier, and checked on Atchafalaya's status through the connection we shared tonight, I could feel its frustration more strongly than usual. The Spanish moss had now completely covered the roadway at mile marker 122. The cypress roots had broken through the asphalt in several places. The second tree line had merged with the normal tree line, meaning the impossible forest was now fully present, no longer just visible to those who knew how to look. The basin was reclaiming its territory whether we gave permission or not. My phone rang. It was Superintendent Haber. "Trooper Thibodeau, I need you at a meeting tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Governor's office in Baton Rouge." "What's the meeting about?" "The governor's made a decision about I-10. He wants you there to provide technical consultation." I felt my stomach drop. "What decision?" "You'll hear it tomorrow morning like everyone else." He hung up, leaving me alone with my growing dread and the certain knowledge, through my connection to Atchafalaya, that whatever the decision was, it wouldn't be enough. The next morning, I drove to Baton Rouge and walked into the governor's conference room. Present were most of the same people I'd been dealing with for months, plus a few new faces, federal highway officials, environmental consultants, and several state legislators who'd been vocal about reopening the highway. Governor Richard Beaumont entered, and everyone stood. He was a tall man in his 60s with the careful, neutral expression of a politician who'd learned not to show his true feelings. "Please sit," he said. "I know we've all spent months debating what to do about the I-10 situation. I've heard arguments from every angle: economic, environmental, safety, cultural, and I've made a decision that I believe balances all these concerns." I braced myself. "We're going to reopen the highway," the governor said, "but with modifications. We'll install high barriers at mile marker 122, the kind used in areas prone to rock slides. These barriers will prevent vegetation from encroaching onto the roadway. We'll increase patrols in the area and install emergency call boxes every quarter mile. We'll reduce the speed limit through the basin section to 45 miles per hour, and we'll conduct weekly environmental monitoring to track any unusual vegetation growth." "Governor," I said, standing up, "with respect, barriers won't stop this. What's happening in the basin isn't normal vegetation growth, it's—" "Trooper Thibodeau, I've read your reports, all of them, including the more unusual claims, and while I respect your dedication to this case, I cannot shut down a major federal highway based on reports of supernatural activity. That's not how government works. Then people are going to die. People die on highways every day. We mitigate the risk as best we can, but we can't eliminate it. The economic cost of closure outweighs the potential safety risk, especially with the new safety measures in place." I looked around the room. Some people looked sympathetic. Others looked relieved. The decision had been made. The highway would reopen in 2 weeks. "I need to make something very clear," I said, my voice steady despite the anger and fear coursing through me. "What's in that basin isn't going to respect barriers or patrols or reduced speed limits. It's territorial, it's been wounded, and it's going to fight back. When it does, the blood will be on all of our hands." "Your objection is noted," the governor said. "But the decision stands. You're dismissed." I walked out of that room knowing that I'd failed. I'd failed to protect Atchafalaya, failed to honor the agreement I'd made, failed the families of everyone who'd disappeared in the basin over the past 50 years. But most of all, I'd failed the people who would disappear in the future. I drove straight from Baton Rouge to the Chitamaca Cultural Center and found Raymond Verret. I told him about the decision, about the barriers and the monitoring and the illusion that any of it would make a difference. Raymond listened quietly, then shook his head. "They don't understand. Or they don't want to understand. It's easier to pretend this is a normal engineering problem than to accept that they built in a place they shouldn't have. What's going to happen when they reopen? Atchafalaya will respond. It let us take those people because you made a promise. If the highway reopens, if the violation continues, it will see that promise as broken. Even though I tried to honor it? Intent doesn't matter to Katie FEMA, only outcome. You promised to work toward removing the highway. The highway is being reinforced instead. From its perspective, you've betrayed the agreement. I felt the connection to Katie FEMA pulse with what I could only describe as grief. It had trusted me, had let me take its claimed victims because of that trust. And now I was going to disappoint it. What can I do? Raymond was quiet for a long moment. There's an old tradition, from before my people's time, from the original inhabitants of this land. When a person betrayed a trust with the spirits, they could sometimes make amends through service. Not temporary service, but permanent. They would become a guardian, a keeper, bound to the place they'd wronged for the rest of their life. I already offered that. You offered to work toward closing the highway. That's different from becoming a true keeper. A keeper doesn't leave. They stay at the sacred place, protecting it, mediating between the human world and the spiritual world, forever. You're saying I should quit my job, move to the basin, and just live there? I'm saying that might be the only way to honor your commitment now that the state has decided to break it for you if you become the permanent guardian. If you're physically present at mile marker 122, maybe Katie FEMA will be satisfied. Maybe it will see that at least one human understands and respects what that place is. And if I don't, then Katie FEMA will take what it's owed, and this time it won't stop at 9 people. I spent the next week agonizing over the decision. Quit my career, leave my life, become a hermit, living in a swamp to appease an ancient consciousness that most people didn't believe existed. It sounded insane, but I could feel Katie FEMA's pain through our connection. I could feel its confusion at being betrayed, its mounting anger, its preparation for a response that would be catastrophic. I talked to my wife, Elizabeth. We'd been married for 12 years, and she'd stood by me through all of this, even though it had tested her patience and her belief in my sanity. "You're really considering this?" she asked when I explained Raymond's suggestion. "Jack, you'd be giving up everything, your job, your home, us, I know. And for what? To live in a swamp and talk to trees? To prevent people from dying, to honor a commitment I made." Elizabeth looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You've changed since this started. You're not the same man I married. Sometimes I look at you and I see something else looking back. Something not quite human." She was right. The connection to Katie FEMA had changed me. I dreamed in green now, in the slow patient thoughts of trees. I felt the passage of seasons more intensely than the passage of days. I was becoming something between human and other, a bridge connecting 2 worlds. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't ask for this." "No, but you chose it when you made that promise, and now you have to follow through, or it will destroy you." She took my hands. "I love you, Jack, but I can't follow you into this. If you become the keeper, you do it alone." We divorced a month later. It was amicable, as much as a divorce can be. Elizabeth remarried 2 years after that, moved to Texas, started a new life. I'm happy for her. She deserved someone who could be fully present, fully human. I resigned from the Louisiana State Police 2 weeks before the highway was scheduled to reopen. My letter of resignation was simple. Personal reasons, effective immediately. Colonel Hebert called me into his office. "Jack, you don't have to do this. Whatever pressure you're feeling, whatever you think you need to prove, it's not worth throwing away your career." "It's not about proving anything, sir. It's about responsibility. I made a commitment, and I need to honor it." "A commitment to what? A swamp?" To the people who'll use that highway, someone needs to watch over mile marker 122. Someone who understands what's really there. That someone has to be me. He studied me for a long moment. You really believe all of it, don't you? The sentient forest, the ancient consciousness, all of it. I don't just believe it, sir. I'm connected to it. I feel it every moment of every day. And I'm telling you, when that highway reopens, people are going to die unless someone's there to mediate. Then I can't stop you. But Jack, for what it's worth, you've been one of the best officers I've ever worked with. I hope you find whatever you're looking for out there. We shook hands, and I walked out of State Police headquarters for the last time I used what savings I had to buy a small houseboat and basic supplies. I moved to the basin, anchoring at a spot about a quarter mile from mile marker 122, just outside the boundaries of the second tree line. The first night alone in the swamp was terrifying. Every sound, every movement, every shadow seemed threatening. But through the connection, I could feel Katie Fima's acknowledgement. It knew I was there. It understood what I was doing. And slowly the fear faded, replaced by something like acceptance. I wasn't welcome. Exactly, but I was tolerated. Recognized as the guardian I'd promised to be. The highway reopened on schedule, with great fanfare from the governor's office. New barriers had been installed, patrols increased, monitoring systems put in place. For the first week, everything seemed fine. Traffic flowed normally, no incidents were reported. But I could feel Katie Fima watching, waiting, testing the new barriers, probing for weaknesses. On the 8th day, a semi-truck carrying lumber broke down at mile marker 122. The driver called for assistance and waited in his cab. I was there within 5 minutes, having felt the disturbance through my connection. "Thank God," the driver said when he saw me approaching in my boat. "I thought I'd be stuck here for hours. Do you work for the highway department?" "Something like that. What's wrong with your truck?" "Engine just died. 1 second it was fine, the next, nothing." I looked at the truck, then at the Spanish moss that was creeping toward it from the other side of the barrier. The new barriers were high, designed to prevent vegetation from reaching the roadway. But Katie Fima was adapting, growing over the top of the barriers rather than through them. "You need to call another tow truck," I told him. "And you need to stay in your cab until it arrives. Don't get out. Don't open your windows. Don't interact with anything from the swamp." "Why? What's out there?" "Just trust me. Stay inside." I positioned my boat between the truck and the encroaching moss, and through my connection I spoke to Katie Fima. Not in words, but in feelings, in images. I showed it that this driver was innocent, that he didn't want to be here, that he would leave as soon as possible. I asked for patience, for mercy. The moss stopped advancing. The driver was picked up by a tow truck an hour later, unharmed and oblivious to how close he'd come to being taken. That became my routine, living on the houseboat, monitoring the highway through my connection to Katie Fima, intervening when necessary. Most of the time, nothing happened, but every few days there'd be an incident. A breakdown, a minor accident, someone stopping to take photos of the beautiful swamp. And each time I'd be there, mediating between the human world and Katie Fima's territory. The state police eventually realized I was there. They'd see my boat during patrols, would get reports from drivers of a man in the swamp who warned them to keep moving. Some officers tried to make me leave, claiming I was trespassing or creating a safety hazard. But I had permission from the Chitamaca tribe to be on their ancestral lands, and technically, the water I was anchored in wasn't state property. Eventually, they just accepted my presence. Some even started calling me when there was an incident at mile marker 122, knowing I could get there faster than they could. A year passed, then 2. The incidents at mile marker 122 decreased dramatically, not because Katie FEMA had stopped being territorial, but because I was there, explaining, mediating, asking for patience. The tree line stopped advancing. The transformations stopped. The disappearances stopped. But the cost was everything else in my life. I aged faster out there. The connection to Katie FEMA, the constant exposure to its otherness changed me physically. My hair turned gray within a year. My skin took on a rougher texture, almost bark-like in places I could go days without eating, drawing sustenance from the swamp itself through the connection. I was becoming less human and more something else, part man, part forest, part bridge between worlds. But people stopped disappearing. The highway remained open and safe because I was there. 5 years after I became the keeper, Raymond Verrett visited me. He was older now, moving more slowly, but his eyes were still sharp. "You've aged 20 years in 5, he said, looking at me with concern. "It's the price of the connection. Katie FEMA experiences time differently than humans. Being bound to it means experiencing some of that difference. Do you regret it?" I thought about that question. I'd given up everything. My career, my marriage, my normal human life. I lived alone in a swamp, talking to an ancient consciousness, mediating between it and a highway that should never have been built. "No," I said finally. "I made a promise. This is how I keep it. The state still hasn't closed the highway. I know. They never will. The economic arguments are too strong. But as long as I'm here, as long as I maintain the connection, Katie FEMA remains calm. That's enough." "What happens when you die?" "I don't know. Maybe someone else will take up the responsibility. Maybe Katie FEMA will finally reclaim this section of highway. Or maybe by then, humans will have learned to respect the places that should remain wild." Raymond left, and I went back to my watch. That was 20 years ago. I'm still here, still watching, still mediating. I'm an old man now, though I don't know exactly how old time moves strangely when you're connected to something that thinks in centuries rather than days. My houseboat has been replaced twice, though each time I rebuild it a little smaller, need a little less. My connection to Katie FEMA has deepened to the point where I'm not entirely sure where I end and it begins. Sometimes state troopers stop by to check on me. They're young now, these officers. They weren't even born when the incident started. They know me only as the old man who lives at mile marker 122. Some think I'm crazy. Some think I'm some kind of environmental activist. A few, the ones who've been on the force long enough to hear the old stories, understand what I really am. I'm the bridge keeper, the guardian, the price that was paid to allow a highway to exist where it shouldn't. And I'll be here until the day I die, maybe longer, because I made a promise to something ancient and patient and vast, and I'm not the kind of man who breaks his promises. If you ever drive I-10 through the Atchafalaya Basin, if you pass mile marker 122, you might see my boat. You might see an old man, barely distinguishable from the cypress trees around him, watching the highway. Wave if you see me, I won't wave back. But through my connection to Katie FEMA, I'll know you passed safely through. And that's enough. That has to be enough. Because the tree line is always watching, always waiting. And without someone here to speak for the humans who pass through its territory, without someone to ask for mercy on their behalf, the swamp would take what it believes it's owed. Every single person who crosses that bridge owes their safe passage to the agreement I made. They don't know it, and they never will. But I know it, and so does Katie FEMA. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices. If I'd refused to make that promise, if I'd fought harder to close the highway, if I'd never gone into the swamp that first night to rescue Michael Cook. But those are useless thoughts. I made the choices I made. I became what I needed to become. And now I'll remain here, a guardian standing between two worlds until the end of my days. The Spanish moss moves in the wind. The cypress trees stand sentinel. The water reflects the stars. And I watch, always watching, because someone has to.